Y'all can hear me okay, right? I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Vicki Goodwin. I'm the state representative for House District 47, which is Western Travis County. Through redistricting, I lost the very furthest west part, but still go all the way from North Austin down to South Austin, but westernmost district in Travis County. So sitting to my left is County Commissioner Bridget Shea. In 2014, Commissioner Shea was elected to the Travis County Commissioners Court Precinct 2. So our districts overlap in the northwest part of Austin, Steiner Ranch, River Place, I forget everything that's in Precinct 2, but we have some overlap. She came to Austin in 1988 to start the Texas chapter of Clean Water Action. Prior to that, she had been an award-winning journalist at NPR stations in Minnesota and Philadelphia. In Austin, she was a leader in the Save Our Springs movement of 1992, which resulted in Austin's historic SOS law to save Barton Springs. Her carbon reduction work won the TCEQ Environmental Excellence Award in 2010. Today, she will be giving us some highlights from the COP26 Climate Change Conference held in Glasgow, Scotland. Next to her is Mayor Pro Tem Alison Alter. She is serving as District 10 representative on the Austin City Council. With over 20 years of experience as a professor, small business owner, innovator, and community activist, Dr. Alter brings to council a wealth of academic and practical knowledge. Her main priorities on council include advocating for parks and open spaces, identifying opportunities to exercise fiscal responsibility, and make strategic investments, managing the development of a rapidly growing city in a way that respects both long-term and new arrivals alike, long-term residents and new arrivals. She recently mentioned to me some of the work the city of Austin has done to prevent wildfires, particularly in the Northwest Hills and Great Hills area of Austin, again, where our districts overlap. Next to her is Dr. Gloria Gonzalez-Dholakia, who is a Leander Independent School District trustee. She's the proud mother of 3 LISD students. She is currently the executive director of JOLT, and in the past has had a successful career in the educational technology sector and taught as a college professor. She served as the executive director of the Leander ISD Educational Excellence Foundation and is an active volunteer for her son's robotics programs, for their school campus committees and PTA, and for the LISD Council of PTAs. Today, she will give us some insight into some of the schools. And finally, we have Judge Aurora Martinez Jones. She is the judge of the 126th District Court, presiding over the Child Protective Services dockets, Family Drug Treatment Court, and Family Law Matters. She was sworn in on January 1, 2021. As judge, Aurora is responsible for the oversight and administration of all Travis County termination of parental rights civil lawsuits filed on behalf of the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services. She runs a trauma-informed court and continues her work in tearing down the school-to-prison pipeline, assuring race equity in our legal system, and protecting our children. Recently, she was recognized for her work by Texans Care for Children, and at the ceremony, she stated, "Travis County has placed all children in the state's care, so there are no kids without a placement or staying in offices rather than homes or residences." So that is our panel for tonight. Thank you all for coming. I wanted to start off, first of all, for thanking the library for allowing us to have this event here. So it's a central location, beautiful library. So thank you for the library staff. I also wanted to remind you all, I'm sure that everybody here knows, but we do have 2 elections in May 7th and May 24th. And on May 7th, there are 2 constitutional amendments on the ballot, along with some city and for different school districts and school board elections. And then, of course, May 24th is our runoff election, a very important election. Both of them are very important. And I know that a lot of times there's voter fatigue. And so I tasked my staff with finding out, is there a way that we could possibly combine the elections so that voters aren't, number one, confused, and number two, too busy to go to two separate elections in 1 month. And so we're working on that. Something else that I've brought up in the past, and I hear more and more frequently now, is ranked choice voting. And I know there's some people who aren't super crazy about it, but I think if we had an opportunity to try it out and see how it works in real life, that people might actually like the way it works. For one thing, it would eliminate a lot of cost, because in a ranked choice voting, you wouldn't have a runoff election, and that alone saves you cost. But there's a lot of benefits to it. Well, I'm not going to get into all of that. So tonight I really wanted to take some time to talk about some positive things, because I know when we read the news, there's just an awful lot of horrific things going on. You know, the war in Ukraine and some things that are going on at our southern border, you know, some things going on with transgender families and CPS. There's a lot. Every day it seems like there's something new to make us upset. So I wanted to start off with a highlight from each of the panelists of something positive that's happened in their realm lately. And so I'm going to start. It was hard for me to pick one, to be honest, because there have been some good things that have happened recently. But one thing that we did in my office that I thought was particularly fun was last month was Women's History Month. So we invited some small business owners, some women, to come in to the Capitol, and they each shared their story of their business. I'm not going to share all the stories, but I did learn some really fascinating things. So the woman who started Urban Betty, which is a hair salon, told us how she's environmentally friendly. She saves all of the hair that is cut, and she sends it off to this company, and they use it if there's ever an oil spill. Apparently human hair is really good at sopping up oil in the ocean. That was fascinating to me. Another woman started, she's had several businesses, but her latest business is making candy. And she was telling me that there's a lot of rules and regulations around cottage food industry in Texas. And so it turns out that we may work on a piece of legislation that would be helpful to that industry. So it was really fascinating. Another woman started a bookstore. It's great hearing. Austin is so full of these stories of people who have started businesses that have so much creativity, so much energy. And so that to me was a really positive moment this last month. And so with that, I'm going to kick it off to Commissioner Shea, and she's going to give us a highlight, something positive.
Well, this is the opposite of the small business sort of showcase that you set up. But I do think it's positive for the planet that we've just opened the largest electric vehicle manufacturing plant on the planet. And it was really astonishing to tour that site. They have completely reimagined the manufacture of a vehicle. Normally there would be at least 300 welds just to create the auto body. They have boiled it down to, I think, 1 or 2. They literally have vats of molten aluminum, which they inject into huge die casting machines. There's like 8 or more of them. They literally spit out a cast rear frame and front frame, each in 130 milliseconds, and then attach the front and rear frames to the doors, and the roof, and I think they leave the floor open for fitting the other stuff in 45 seconds. I know, it's mind-boggling how they've literally reimagined this whole process. And I know that that Musk is somebody that a lot of people love to hate, and there's probably lots of good reasons for it, but I mean, I'm not judging the character of him or other automobile manufacturers, but I do give him credit for dragging the entire industry into the future by demonstrating that there's a demand for electric vehicles and they can be made very appealing, and it's that kind of transition to new technologies that is essential for us to do in order to prevent the chaos that's coming with climate change. So I give them tons of credit for that. And I will just say, with regard to the economic development agreement that we worked out with Travis County, we're not giving them money that we have. The site that was there before they built their gigafactory was a sand and gravel operation that generated, any guesses, $640 a year in property tax revenue to the county. Even with the economic development agreement, they will generate $1 million or more, which we use for all kinds of programs to help people. And they are targeting for their minimum of 5,000, as much as 10,000 positions that they are hiring for, people who have less than a college degree. And that is more than half our adult population, which I still find a staggering percentage. Many of those are people who are working 2 and 3 jobs, have no health insurance, no retirement, and very little prospect of getting out of poverty. So I think that's a really fabulous addition to the community, on top of the addition to moving us in the right direction on climate change.
Good evening. My name is Alison, and I serve as Mayor Pro Tem for the City of Austin. Before I talk about something positive, I want to thank Representative Goodwin and your staff for organizing this great panel. I'm really honored to be on it today with such wonderful female leaders for Northwest Austin. So thank you very much. I'm going to try and be brief here. And one of the things that I want to highlight is some work that we've been doing to support our nonprofit cultural arts organizations. So over the last several months, we've been able to provide 218 cultural arts organizations in our city with $20,000 grants, which are really going to help them as they transition out of the pandemic or into this new stage that we're in. I was hoping we were out, but maybe not. And you know, our arts organizations in our community really contribute to who we are in Austin, and it's important that we find ways to help them succeed and make this transition. And so I'm really proud of that work. One other thing that I wanted to mention was a group of women leaders that I brought together for International Women's Day in March at City Hall. We had over 80 women together. We had our city leadership in terms of our city staff, our director level and above females, our 8 female council members, which is a super majority of council. And then we had members from every part of the legislative and elected delegations from across our city. And for those of you who don't know, you know, yes, we have a panel up here at Northwest Austin, leaders who are all women, but I think every delegation in Travis County, whether it is the city council, whether it's the county commission, whether it's AISD, whether it's ACC, whether it is our judges, our county attorney, are all female majority, or even. And that says a lot about Travis County and where we're going, and I'm proud to be standing among those women. I'm sorry, I don't know if Leander is also majority female. Is there more? Okay, great. So Leander as well. People don't know that, and I think it's really important. And I was proud on International Women's Day for us to celebrate it. Our state delegation for the legislature is, I think, going to be all female, like me. But I did tell her. Is he in Austin? Okay. It's majority female. Way majority female as well. So I will pass it on.
Thank you. And yes, thank you, Representative Goodwin, for hosting us. My name is Dr. Gloria Gonzalez-Dholakia, and I am a board of trustee for Leander ISD. And people often ask me, but you live in Austin. And yes, I do live in Austin. Leander ISD is Northwest Austin, most of Cedar Park, most of Leander, the corner of Round Rock, the corner of Georgetown, the corner of Liberty Hill, corner of Long Vista. So we are a really big school district, and in that regard, I would say something positive to share. So my other hat, I am the executive director of Adult, and when I think of what's positive, every year in Texas, over 200,000 Latinos turn 18. And when you think about the power of that vote right there, think about that voting block. Think about the power of all these young people that are turning 18 every year in Texas. It fires me up, it excites me. I think it's something wonderful, and they are engaged like 18-year-olds never before. When I was that age, I know I wasn't paying attention to all of those things, and young people now are very engaged and they're paying attention. On the school district side, students are back in the classroom and extracurriculars are happening. And when you see all these extracurriculars, you see these opportunities for students to be intrinsically motivated to pull learning in from, and be able to pull learning and expand learning and find new ways to extend learning into areas that they really care about. In our school district, we have bands that are winning at all levels. We have a robotics team that won state gold, and they're going to the world championship next week. So just amazing to see what our students are doing. I hear people talk about learning loss, and they want to talk about learning loss. Learning loss, what happened during COVID. It's not learning loss. Let's talk about pandemic learning. It was a different way of learning. Our students didn't stop learning. They didn't stop developing. They learned about resiliency. They learned about creativity. They learned different things. A lot of students learned how to do their own laundry. They learned how to do a lot of different things. And so now we're coming back into the classroom, and it's adjusting back to classroom learning, but it wasn't a loss. It was just a different type of learning.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Great panel. Thank you, Representative Goodwin. I'm Aurora Martinez Jones. I'm the district judge by local agreement who's responsible for all of the child welfare cases in Travis County, all of our CPS cases. I do have an associate that works with me, and I am an eternal optimist. I have something good to share, even though the state is in a dire situation as it relates to child protective services. The wonderful thing is in Travis County, we are reimagining child welfare. We have a pilot that is literally called Travis County Child Welfare Reimagined. And what we're doing is kind of everything differently. And one of the first very wonderful things we did, Representative Goodwin mentioned, the children that were sleeping in offices or in spaces that were not authorized, we have no more of that with our Travis County children. Our Travis County children all have placement. They have skilled, qualified, trained caregivers on a day-to-day basis. And that was brought together by collaboration with so many people, from the county to the city to the schools. The criminal justice system intersects with us. They are partnering with us. Everybody is partnering with us. We've been talking to members of the legislature and telling them some of the ideas that we've been coming up with. We've had foundations, local foundations give us grant money to do this work. We have a local nonprofit, Partnerships for Children, who provide a lot of supplies for children who are in foster care. They do our rainbow rooms at the offices to provide extra things. There are nonprofit arms for our pilot, and Safe Alliance that does advocacy for people who've experienced family violence and trafficking. They are the providers who have helped us assure that our children are in qualified placements. They're in safe and appropriate placements. So we launched our pilot the first week in January, and we had all of our children out of offices, out of unqualified, unrestricted placements, and into real placements by the end of March. We did that in Travis County. I hope we can teach something to the state. But we are taking care of our children in Travis County, and that is a wonderful, wonderful thing that I'm so happy to share.
Awesome. So a couple of thoughts came to my head. So do you think you could get me a tour of the factory? Oh, it's hard. It's hard. Well, as a Tesla owner, I kind of thought I might be on that list of 15,000 that were invited, but I don't know. And then I just have to say, in the Capitol this session, there was a day when Gloria and Joel came, and they dropped a rose petal to represent all of the 200,000 Latina girls who would be turning 18 in 2022 from the rotunda, and they just covered the rotunda. It was amazing and beautiful, and I still to this day wonder how in the world she got those rose petals in there to throw down the balcony.
But it was 200,000 rose petals to represent the youth that turn 18 in the state of Texas every year.
So the next part, since we're here in a library tonight, I thought it would be fun for each of us to share a book that we're reading right now. And you know, we've had this thing going on in the state that started with one of the representatives asking the school districts to compile a list of certain 800 books if they had those books in the school libraries. And of course, soon after that happened, I talked to a superintendent or two and asked them, got their impression, and they weren't too happy with it. They have enough on their plate other than having to go through their libraries and pull out these books. But you know, when something's forbidden, sometimes it has the opposite effect. People kind of want to know, well, what is it about that book that makes it forbidden? And I'm one of those people. So, you know, one of the books on the list is Mouse. And I was very curious about it. I was like, this book is about the Holocaust. And why in the world would it be taken off the shelves? So I found out it's a graphic novel. I'm not really much of a graphic novel reader. That's just not my thing. So I was talking to somebody and she said, well, I'm getting it for my 16-year-old nephew. And I thought, what a great idea. I've got a 16-year-old nephew as well. So I decided to buy it, read it myself, and then I'm giving it to him. But the first few pages, I thought, I don't know if I'm gonna read this whole thing, but it's actually fascinating, and I'm down to just a few more pages left. So, you know, it's, why would you not want a teenager to have kind of a teenager viewpoint of the Holocaust? The main character is older than a teenager, but he's interviewing his dad. His dad lived through the Holocaust. And but it's not simply about the Holocaust. It's about relationships, their family, and it's about this young adult learning about his family history from his dad. And it's fascinating. So why they would want to take that off a library shelf, I have no idea, but there are 800 books on that list. Another book I'm reading, a little bit happier, funnier one that I really think my fellow representatives could do well with reading, is called How to Be Perfect, and it's a book about ethics. The author has read through a lot of the philosophers, Immanuel Kant, you name it, but he's also the comedic writer for the show The Good Place. So if anyone has ever seen The Good Place, it's very funny. And the book is very much in that same style. So again, it's How to Be Perfect, told in a very humorous way. So that's what I'm reading right now.
Those sound very entertaining. I've been working on climate issues for 34 years, and so I'm clearly obsessed with the subject. It's why I came to Texas in 1988 after hearing Dr. James Hansen's testimony to Congress about this phenomenon. And so it changed my life. And I read a lot of this stuff. I've always kind of liked disaster movies and novels and been drawn to them. But there are a couple of books, and then some magazine articles I've been reading. One is called Drawdown, and it literally is, some of the best scientific minds listing the things that we can do to reverse climate change. So it's hopeful, because there are things that we can do. I know it seems like such a massive, I mean, it's a planetary phenomenon, and it's normal for people to think, what can I do? How can I make a difference? But we all can. And the number one thing on the list of things that people can do, any guesses? Eat less meat, that's a possible one, it's not the number one. Say what? Bicycles, that's on the list, not the number one item. Which one? Talk about it. Talk about it actually really is incredibly powerful and important, particularly talking about it with friends in a way that people can hear, because I do hear from a lot of people that it's such a depressing subject, they really don't want to talk about it. But there are things that we can do that will have an impact. The number one thing on the list is to be more responsible with refrigerants. We all have air conditioning, and we all use refrigerants in multiple ways in any of our office buildings. A water fountain that has cold water has refrigerants in it. If you have a server room, because your computers are getting hot, they have cooling devices in there that use refrigerants. So there's refrigerants, vending machines. Refrigerants are used all throughout the building, in addition to the most obvious one, which is to cool a building. And these have to be serviced periodically. How many people have ever had to call a technician, have their air conditioner fixed or serviced? Okay, most everybody. That's generally because the refrigerants are leaking. And that's something that we can do in our homes anytime there's a problem with our air conditioning systems, or even if we want to be proactive and have somebody come and check. But to have a conversation with the service technician to make sure that they are properly capturing any of the leaking refrigerants. And by the way, this is in federal law, but it's just not enforced. And there's not a federal agent there when you have a technician coming to your house. It's not heavily enforced, but make sure that they are fixing the leak so that they don't have to keep coming back and recharging your air conditioning system. And just ask them if it's an old system and they have to replace the refrigerant with a newer refrigerant, ask them what they're doing with the old refrigerant. Like, be a curious and conscientious consumer when you call to hire somebody to come work on your air conditioning system. So everyone can do that. And then ask at your office place, how are we tracking what's happening with the air conditioning systems in our office buildings? I asked that at the county, and I was a little surprised to find that under 50 pounds, which is, it's a smaller unit, it's still fairly big, but a smaller unit, they weren't tracking them because they thought they were too small. And we have hundreds of buildings in the county, so if they weren't tracking the smaller systems, there was the potential for a lot of those systems leaking, and we would never know. So we instituted a program to just be more rigorous about tracking all of our air conditioning systems. So there are things that we can do, and I would just encourage you all. Drawdown is also available online. It's in short little examples that are written for a non-scientific reader. So there's so many things that you can do, and to me that's part of the message that's really important. We can all have an impact, and we have to. Two other things real quick, and they're both from the New Yorker. There's so many phenomenal writers that write for the New Yorker. One's called, the article's called Under the Dome, and it was written October of 21, and it was a description of what happened in Portland the previous summer. Maybe I remember the summer of 21 and how hot it got in Portland, Oregon. I mean, those people are not accustomed to hot summers, so a lot of people didn't have air conditioning systems, but it was a description of what happened at the atmospheric level that caused such a profound heat wave. They think anywhere between 300 and 600 people died from the heat. I mean, people were literally falling on the sidewalk not dead from the heat. And we do know from projections that the southern part of the country will be much hotter and much drier. So one of the things that I'm knitting together, I had the privilege to represent local governments at the Conference of Parties, the COP gathering in Glasgow, Scotland, last fall, the UN Climate Summit. And the mayor of Miami-Dade, there were a number of us as local elected officials who were there representing local governments. The mayor of Miami-Dade announced that they would begin naming and tracking heat storms in the same way that they do hurricanes, because the heat storms would be at least as deadly and destructive and disruptive, and so they were beginning to track them and name them and treat them as something that they had to pay attention to. They also created the first position of chief heat officer, which I think we're going to have to be looking at in all of our southern cities. And their responsibility was to create a network of cooling centers and do the kind of education and outreach that would be necessary in the community so that people would know that they had a place to go if it became so hot that wherever they were was unbearably hot. And then there was another article about the permafrost. It was also in the New Yorker, which is a fascinating read. And I just figure we're better off if we're armed with knowledge. And this one was January of 2022, called the Great Thaw. And this is one of the phenomena that we are going to have to be dealing with climate change and the impacts on our lives. But I do believe if we educate people, if we're proactive, which is what I'm focusing on in my work, we can help our citizens be better prepared so that they know how to deal with the impacts of climate change, and they know what actions they can take in their own lives to address it.
Thank you. I'm curious, how many of you have a stack of books that you've ordered from Amazon that you haven't read next to your bed? So I'm in that camp. I have a whole bunch of books that I've ordered that are serious, thoughtful books. But what I'm really reading right now is the Bridgerton series. Because I read thousands of pages for my job every week. We'll have 100 items on the agenda with all sorts of backup. And when I'm going to bed, I need to not have my brain thinking. So the Bridgerton series is a welcome relief, and I think right now, as we all figure out how we come out of COVID and get our equilibrium back, I've decided to give myself the freedom to read that stuff. I think everyone else here is going to talk about real serious reads, and I'm happy to regale you with all of my zoning reading and my plans about the essential waterfront, all sorts of things like that right now, which is what I get to read on the more serious side these days, but I don't want to bore you. So.
Thank you. I spend a lot of time reading, and I spend a lot of time listening to audiobooks. So I drive a lot, and so I'm usually always listening to one and reading one. And this is one that I just finished listening to. If you listen to audiobooks, I'm an audiobook, like I said, junkie. It's called We Are Not From Here, and it was it's the journey of 3 young people from Guatemala through Mexico into the United States. And it's just, you fall in love with them. And if you love audiobooks, when it's over, you will mourn the loss of your relationship with the narrator. Like, you just want her to be part of your life forever. And so it's a wonderful audiobook. This is one I just finished reading, and now we're all reading it together in the office at Joel. It's called The Purpose of Power, and it was written by Alicia Garza, who is one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's really, she talks about, in the aftermath of Trayvon Martin's murder, she tweeted, "Black people, I love you, I love us, our lives matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter." And it started this movement. And she talks a lot about her career in movement building and how to bring people together for a cause. And one of the things she says in here that just really stuck with me is she reflects on how making room amongst the woke for those who are still awakening can inspire and activate more people to fight for a world we all deserve. So I feel like it's really helpful as we are trying to build movements, that we've got to bring people together, and we've got to find places where we can agree on things, where we can build together. So I love that one. I also, probably every book that comes through our district for reconsideration and book banning, I've read all of them. And I will tell you, Representative Goodwin, you're absolutely right about ban something, and now we can't keep those banned books in the library. There are books that have been in the library for years, and I can see, oh, it got checked out 2 times in the past 4 years. Now there's a wait list. And so ban a book, and young people are like, I gotta find out what that's about. But, you know, all this book reconsideration, I tell everyone, I absolutely believe in parental rights. You should have the right to choose what's right for your family, and I should have the right to choose what's right for my family. You can choose what's right for your family. You do not get to choose what's right for everybody else's family, mine included, right? So I just think books are these amazing mirrors into seeing yourself reflected. They're also this other opportunity to open a door into another world. I love books. I could talk about books forever. I'm first generation to college in my family, and I'm so passionate about education, and it all started because of one little book that a teacher gave me, and it's House on Mango Street, written by Sandra Cisneros. And I had never in my life thought there was a book written about like a Latino, all about like growing up poor and being Latina, like who, and it was in her voice. I just never saw myself represented in a book. Didn't think my story was valuable, didn't think it was valid, didn't think it was important. And so that one little book that this one teacher gave me, it changed my entire life and opened this door into another world for me. So I love books. I could talk about books forever, but these are the 2 right now that I've kind of been in love with.
So I know my reading material at work is probably along the lines of Mayor Pro's come. So my reading for personal pleasure is usually a little different, a little bit more personal. And right now I'm reading Forget the Alamo. About halfway in, it's been very interesting, and it's especially interesting to me because I'm biracial. My dad is from Mexico, my mother is from Jamaica, and I'm a first generation American. But interesting enough, I started rethinking of that because my grandfather passed during the pandemic at 98 years old. And I feel very lucky because before he passed, I had an opportunity to sit with him and just talk about things that I had never heard about from him. And we had a lot of conversation. He answered so many questions that I didn't know if he would answer, but he did, just about his history. And my grandmother, who passed when I was about 5 years old. And what I learned was that my grandmother, who I believe to be a Mexican citizen, was actually born in San Antonio. And my whole family, my dad and his brothers and sisters and his parents were all living in Mexico. And I never quite understood how they got green cards and got over, but I said, maybe I won't ask. But my grandfather said that it was because he had to do the legwork. He had to do a lot of digging. We had to find family members from my grandmother's side to find her original birth certificate that showed she was actually born in San Antonio. And he kind of said, you know, the border has moved around our family. Not that our family is moving back and forth over the border. And so that gave me extra personal intrigue. In addition to this Juneteenth last year, my dad sent me some articles talking about the path to freedom for American slaves that went south to Mexico. And how in Mexico, there were many who were helping slaves out of Texas to be free in Mexico. And so it was really intriguing, and I'm kind of reading it for hints, just in case I can find more about my family history. But I'm currently reading Forget the Alamo. It did get a little bit of press coverage for some controversial things in our town, which also spiked my interest to say, yeah, I should read that, so you're right. Tell people not to look at a book and they will. So that's the book that I'm currently reading.
Yeah, I read Forget the Alamo as well. And I as a teenager, I loved Phil Collins. And so when he was in the book, I was like, is that the same Phil Collins? I mean, that just is, yeah, he apparently had bought a lot of the Alamo artifacts, but there's some question as to whether they're really real artifacts. Anyway, that was a pretty good book too. And same thing, you know, Lieutenant Governor had said that the author couldn't come and have a book signing event at the Bob Bullock Museum. And so I immediately bought the book. So there you go. So the next section, we're each going to talk a little bit about what's going on in our offices. And I want y'all to be thinking of what questions you will ask after this next round, because then it will be open to question and answer. So there's a lot going in the legislature, a lot going on in the legislature right now. But in preparation for tonight, in the news, there's been a lot of talk about recapture again, because AISD is getting ready to have to send over $1 billion to the state in recapture for school public education finance. So I asked my staff to ask a few questions of TEA so that I could really have in my head what the numbers are. I believe in the current school year, Austin has sent just under $800 million to the state, and then it's going to jump up to the $1.3 billion. But through all the questions that my staff asked, we found out that their TEA says there's a $1.3 billion surplus for this current school year. And I'm just thinking, oh, that's bad. Because what happens when there is a surplus is they'll just move it into the general fund and it will get used for other things, not public education, which it's intended for. And so just coincidentally, a couple of days ago, the superintendent from Lago Vista had brought his band to the Capitol to play in the rotunda. They do that every year. And so I went up and I spoke to him afterwards and I just asked him how things were going. And again, about the funding of the schools, because I know a lot of school districts are having to pay a higher recapture next year. And so they're already starting to be a little concerned about that. So he said, well, the school year this year was pretty good. The first 4 weeks of there's six week periods. And the first 4, we got held harmless. So basically, based on what we expected the attendance to be, TEA is going to go ahead and fund us at that rate because we set our budgets. But again, with COVID, even this school year, a lot of absences. And once somebody tested positive for COVID, they were out for 10 days. And when you're funding a school district based on average daily attendance, that is huge. So the numbers were concerning. Well, so TEA is holding them harmless for the first 6 weeks, but not the last 6 weeks. 6 week, yes, period, sorry. And so here I am thinking we've got this surplus and we've got the school districts that are now going to be really in a financial pinch because there are still a lot of absences. There's still COVID going around. Even this week, you know, it seems like every week and every day I hear about somebody's kid or nephew or somebody that has tested positive. So that really does affect the school districts. Now, on top of that, the legislature passed a law saying that if students don't pass the STAR test this year, they have to get tutoring during the summer. And again, speaking with the Lago Vista superintendent, he said, in order to get the teachers to come back and tutor during the summertime, we're having to pay them $50 an hour. $50 an hour equates to $95,000 a year if you do the math. That's a lot more than what they pay their teachers normally. That's what it will take for them. And the legislature didn't give the school districts any money. They just said you have to do the tutoring. And another unfunded mandate was the reading academies. Again, we passed a bill saying that kindergarten through 3rd grade teachers have to get extra training so that they're able to teach the kids how to read. And so they have to go through these reading academies, which I believe is 60 hours of additional education. And so
Nobody did it in 60 hours. It was really like 120 hours.
So, yeah, and so anyway, the point being that school districts have a lot that they have to do that adds to their costs. And at the same time, they have a lot of absences, which deducts from their revenue from the state. Anyway, it's continuing to be an issue. You know, I got into the legislature because of my interest in school finance and making sure that we gave the schools the monetary resources that they need to do well. And here we are back in that same position just a few years later. It's going to be difficult to tackle, but I do have a couple of bills that we plan to file. One of which would increase the basic allotment on an annual basis because of inflation, because it would make a substantial dent in the recapture payments, and it would just make it a lot better for our school districts. The second thing is to not allow TEA to call educational dollars surplus, which would not allow them to get pulled into the general fund. So those are a couple of ideas that we've got on that front. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm on Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee, and recently a few of my staff members and I went down to the border to see what's going on the border. Operation Lone Star is the governor's program to send 10,000 National Guard troops there. We've spent $2 billion on that in the last couple of years. And we're about to have a hearing where the commander says we need another 500 million to finish out this year. So the way the governor has gotten the money for it is he pulls it out of one agency's budget and just takes it. So no approval from the legislators. He just does what he feels he needs to do. And we all know this is a political stunt. So we went down to the border just to see for ourselves what things look like. Had an opportunity to meet face-to-face with 3 of the National Guard members and had a 1.5-hour conversation with them where they were just nonstop telling me about the issues that they were facing with the pay, inappropriate equipment or lack of equipment, with not even knowing what the mission is, not knowing what success looks like, sitting out in an empty field, helping the migrants after they had deboarded a boat and helping them up the side of the embankment, sitting in front of elected officials, ranches, it was on and on. And then they talked about one of the members had just come back from Afghanistan, had a week at home, and then was deployed to the southern border. His wife had told him, if you leave again, that's it for us. You know, there's members going through divorces, going through financial stress because their regular job pays more. So, not a very uplifting story, but I do feel like it was helpful for us to go to the border and to talk to different people, to get different viewpoints. We talked to the mayor of Brownsville, who said they have a very effective and efficient system for when the migrants are released by Border Patrol. They get them on a bus to go to where family is within a day. So, but now the governor is paying for them to go up to DC. So a lot of issues that I could unravel there, but my feeling is that $1.3 billion surplus in education, in effect, could be helping to pay for this border Operation Lone Star, which hasn't really fixed any problems. So
we're working on a number of things. We're doing a number of things in our office. Probably the biggest thing that we're doing at the county that affects most of our offices, or many of them, is when the pandemic started, everybody scrambled, get their laptops and get out of their offices, because we didn't know how contagious this was. We were still trying to understand what this thing was. So everyone left quickly and began trying to figure out how to work from home. And how many people did that? Just I'm curious to see a show of hands. Some people did that in one fashion or another. And it actually worked pretty well. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it worked fairly well. And what we saw 2 months into it was we had documented an increase in productivity. No big surprise here. People got to work faster. And they loved not being stuck in traffic every morning and every evening. So our employee morale improved. And we were reading stories and seeing news coverage all over the planet where people were saying in previously very polluted areas, oh, I know, I can see the night sky, or I can see the sun, or I can see the distant mountains, or, you know, in areas along the coastal or waterways, I can see to the bottom of the waterway. I can see there's marine life here. And so I work with Gerald Doherty, who's the only Republican on the court, and he's since retired. And we brought a direction to the court, which was passed unanimously, directing our staff to bring back a plan for us to telecommute on a permanent basis. And our goal was 75% of our eligible employees, meaning people who didn't have to physically be at their job to do their job. So obviously corrections officers can't do this, medical examiner can't do this, people who work in our community centers can't do this, people who work in our tax office, where there's a lot of in-person transactions, can't do this, people in a number of other areas. But about half of the 5,000 staff/employees at Travis County were eligible. And we were above 2,500 telecommuting at the beginning of the process. So the staff came back, the management support, we had a lot of conversations with the management, and you know, sort of, it wasn't a surprise to them. They knew that we wanted to ask for them to bring back a plan to do this. And we have been close to achieving 75% of our eligible employees telecommuting since March of 2020. My office is among them. I go in on Tuesdays for the commissioners' court meetings, but otherwise, I do the majority of my work from home, and then in-person meetings like this, which are now beginning to happen again. But we have dramatically reduced one of our top sources of greenhouse gas emissions, which was employee commute. And we've done the equivalent of taking 1,200 cars off the road each year. So that's a huge thing, and it's a logical shift in a lot of ways. I mean, a lot of big companies are doing this, and there's a whole kind of reimagination about what to do with a lot of downtown office buildings, and many discussions within corporate offices where it makes a difference for people to come to work for that company if they're able to telecommute. So I'm really proud of what we've been able to do with Travis County doing it. We've also saved $1.3 million on our utilities. Some of that was switching over to using treated wastewater for our air conditioning system for the non-potable use, which is the largest use of water in most big buildings. This building does it here at the city. So I'm just thrilled about that. I feel like it's improved the quality of life for a lot of our employees. We're also working with our HR department to try and figure out how to essentially make it more equal for the employees that have to come into work. Because the reality for the people who are able to telecommute is they're effectively getting a raise. So they're not having to spend all that money on gasoline driving to and from work every day. So we're in the process of trying to figure out how to make this more equitable. But that's one of the things that we're doing at the office I'm really thrilled about. We also initiated a neighborhood-based fire drill. And this was one of the reasons why I ran for office, and it's been my major focus, and the reason why I ran again is to figure out what we can do to make our community more resilient and more prepared for the impacts of climate change. Wildfire is one of them. Our region is one of the top wildfire regions in the country. Most people aren't aware of that. So people need to know what to do if there's a wildfire. So we asked around and said, you know, what would be a useful thing for the county to do? And someone from Bastrop who had lost their home in a fire said, what about a fire evacuation drill? We do them in schools, but we don't do them in neighborhoods. And so we looked around, we tried to find an example that we could build off of, and literally couldn't find one anywhere. So we created it, and we did it with the Comanche Trail neighborhood, which is small enough that you can do an experiment. We were a fairly cohesive community, a lot of retired people, so a lot of free time on their hands, which was what we needed. And they were willing to do it. They knew that they were in danger of a wildfire. They had only one way in and one way out. If you've ever been to the Oasis and then gone down to past Hippie Hollow or down to the end of that road, that's where Comanche Trail is. There are about 200 homes. And we got 85 people to participate. when we finally ran the dirt, but we spent about a year and change meeting every week with the residents, with our emergency service district firefighters, Lake Travis Fire and Rescue, with the sheriff's department, with our own emergency personnel, with park rangers, to create a template. And that's now available on the Travis County website. If you just Google neighborhood fire drill, Travis County, it'll take you to the site. And it's something that any neighborhood can put together. It does require that you do the legwork and organize your neighborhood and have an HOA or some kind of neighborhood organization as the sponsor. But it's something that everyone can do, and we won national and state awards with it. So that's been the focus of my office. We've been doing a whole series of initiatives like that. And the last one I'll mention is One Central Texas. Any of you heard of that? It's the emergency notification system that lets you know if there's a fire and you need to get out, if there's a flood coming, if there's a tornado coming, if there's a boil water notice. How many of you got a boil water notice on your phone? That was partly because we worked to improve the emergency notification system. It's operated by CAPCOG, which is this 10-county regional body of government. COG is a perfect name for it. Anyway, when I took office and got on that board, I learned about this system, and I asked about all of the phone numbers in the database and how they gathered them, because they have about 500,000 of them for Travis County, which was huge. Most of these systems, you're lucky if you get 10%. The population. I said, how did you get so many? And they said, oh, we swept all the landlines in when we started the system years ago. And I looked around and I asked my colleagues on the CAPCOG board, how many of you still have landlines? And they're all older than me. And they all raised their hands. And I said, all right, you're the wrong demographic. How many of you know young people who have landlines? And nobody raised their hand. So they did an audit and found that 75% of the entire database for Travis County went to businesses and call centers and government buildings. And so that began the process of us literally transitioning that critical life-saving emergency notification system from an analog landline-based system to a cell phone-based system. And we increased the reach from 7% to almost 70% in Travis County. So those are just some of the things we've been working on in the office.
Thank you, Bridget. I want to follow up on the wildfire prevention aspect of your work, and I've been proud to partner with you on that. In 2021, we experienced Winter Storm Uri, and that was a high-risk, low-probability event. Here in Austin, and especially in Northwest Austin, it's a matter of when, not if, we experience a wildfire. And for us, a wildfire event is a high probability, high risk event. And we need to do everything we can to prepare. And I've been working on improving our ability to prevent wildfires and to mitigate the impacts for several years. And I'll talk a little bit about some of that work. So in 2019, we completed an audit of our wildfire prevention efforts and identified several things that we could work on. We increased our investments in fuels mitigation. Fuels are the leftover brush from our trees that fall and just from drying out. We have improved our Austin Energy's vegetation management system. By the end of this year, we will have cleared every line that's a high wildfire risk and a low reliability circuit. So we've already seen enormous improvements in reliability from that, but that is really a substantial reduction in our wildfire risk and our ability to respond. And if you live in Northwest Austin, because I've been pushing for this, and we have the highest wildfire risk as according to Austin Energy's definitions. Pages District 8 has the highest wildfire risk district according to the fire department, but according to Austin Energy, for their circuits, it was Northwest Austin. Every one of our high wildfire, low reliability circuits will be done. We adopted a version of the International Wildland Urban Interface Code, which requires new development that's in the wildland urban interface to be hardened so that it is creates less risk for homeowners who are in that. We funded land planning for our city parks and preserves, which have a lot of land that can be at risk for wildfire We also have led efforts to make sure that our city infrastructure is hardened for wildfire risk. We have water treatment plants that are right in the WUI, and we need to be really careful about those. We secure training opportunities not only for AFD, but for all of the ISDs, because we've trained trainers in something called responding to the interface, which is the next level of wildfire training. And we're going to have every one of our firefighters trained in that. It's really important that our firefighters understand how to fight a wildfire as opposed to a structure fire. And so we have the ability, though, because we trained 24 trainers, to be able to include ESD and county firefighters in those trainings as those roll out. We've got community education that's taking place across Northwest Austin, across the city, where communities are getting together, getting themselves organized, and helping each other be prepared for wildfire. You can actually call our wildfire division and get somebody to come out to your home and do a fire-wise assessment to help you understand what you can do for your own home to minimize your risk. We're currently working on evacuation efforts. We have funded in the budget some additional evacuation technology, so that we'll be able to direct people the right path. Just because there's one path that you know to get out doesn't mean it's the right path in the nature of fire. We've been learning from other fires and how they've been working. We've been sending firefighters to other states and even within Texas to help fight fires so they get experience fighting those wildfires. I encourage you to take advantage of those FireWise resources. If you're not getting my newsletter, please sign up there. I pretty regularly send updates on wildfire work. The other thing that I want to emphasize is another public safety issue for Northwest Austin, which is really important, which is access to healthcare, access to EMS. One of the things that I've been looking at as we see the significant health disparities in our community, the inefficiencies in our system that have been laid bare with COVID, doing a lot of work to help improve access to healthcare and to improve our EMS system. In the summer of 2020, during the height of the COVID pandemic, I launched the Office of the Chief Medical Officer, which is now led by Dr. Escott, who was at the time our interim health authority. That's going to provide new and innovative health services to our community and do it cheaper and better and faster. So we're essentially going to take a strategic focus to leveraging our health clinicians that are in our system and making sure that we're using them to address the chief medical issues in a strategic, data-driven way. We are also providing support to EMS because we have physicians who are in this group who can provide telemedicine. We've hired paramedic practitioners, which tend to be nurse physician assistants who go out and they can take care of certain procedures that our EMS staff are not licensed to take care of, but mean you don't have to go to the emergency room. You might need a suture. There's a bunch of different things that they can do instead of going to the emergency room. And we're able to do that, and we're able to charge insurance for it, and then we have mechanisms for those who can't afford it, so it can be self-sustaining as we go. I've also authorized and championed increased supervision for our EMS staff, so at the higher levels of staff, at division chiefs, et cetera. And we also have some challenges in our billing for EMS, where we are not billing in all the ways that we can. There were some changes in the state law we weren't taking care of, and so that funding, we're now working to make sure that we can recoup all that funding, and then we're going to invest that hopefully in the EMS system and increasing the access to EMS throughout our system. So those are some of the ways that we've been working on those issues. And then I didn't want to let go of this opportunity to also talk about, I'm chair of the Audit and Finance Committee. I serve on the Austin Water Oversight Committee. So we're also very focused on, making sure the aftermath of the latest water boil notice that we are taking the steps that we need to take to ensure that that doesn't happen again. And we can talk more about that.
Thank you. I think I'll start with where Representative Goodwin left off on school finance. School finance is a monster. You know, you try to talk to folks about school finance and pretty soon people's eyes glaze over as I talk about M&O and INS and CABs and SIBs. And really what people say is, I don't understand, my property tax is going up. My house value is going up. Why are our schools not getting more? Because I see this, you know, my property value went up, so what's happening here? And I think it's really important for folks to understand that that's not part of our revenue income. That as your property value goes up and you pay more tax, the state just puts in less, and then once that bucket is full, then it goes back to the state. We don't keep that overage. So basically, you get a bucket this big, and property tax will fill it up, and the state says, oh, good, you're all full with that. We don't have to put any in. Oh, and now the bucket is full, so we'll take what's left. That bucket, a lot of that is determined, the size of that, on that basic allotment. Basic allotment for students was increased in 2019. Before that, it hadn't been increased for almost a decade. Representative Goodwin did try to pass a bill in 2019 for that to increase every year. It didn't pass. And so here we are in 2022. We've had this increase in inflation. We have the basic allotment of 2019. And so that's how much we get per student. We also get our funding based, as Representative Goodwin mentioned, on attendance, not the number of students that are in your campus. So if we have a lot of people absent one day, do we get to fire the staff for that day? No, you still gotta pay everybody. You can't turn off half the lights in the building. You still keep the building on. You still have your staff at full capacity. So paying schools through this attendance, it doesn't work, especially in the COVID year, where if you test positive, you have to quarantine for 10 days according to Texas health requirements. Students have to still quarantine for 10 days. That's a lot of absences. So that's hurting schools significantly on our M&O budget. M&O is your maintenance and operations. That's how you pay your staff. And so right now, tell everyone, we have to be concerned about our teachers, about our educators. They can't afford to be teachers anymore. They can't afford to live in the neighborhoods that they teach in. Their rent is, you know, we have staff that tell us my rent went up 8%, and y'all are talking about a 2 to 3% raise for me. How do I maintain this? And the number one thing people say is property taxes. Like how are we not seeing this? And so I think it's just really important for folks to understand that those are different revenue pieces, and that increase in property taxes does not mean an increase in revenue for our school districts. What we're doing in LISD, we're trying to move, and this is where people like look at me and say, okay, you lost me. So you have your INS money, and then you have your M&O money, which maintenance and operations is how you pay people. We're trying to move money from one pool to the other side. INS is how you pay back debt and bonds. And that's the only thing you can do with that. We do see an influx in that coming in with the increase in taxes, but none of that goes to maintenance and operations. So one of the things that our CFO has proposed in Leander is to actually decrease the tax rate for our community significantly, because it's all going to get sent back anyway. So let's decrease the tax rate, and let's have a vote, which is, it's called a VATRE. It's a voter approved tax rate increase, or no, voter approved tax rate change, something like that. But the language on that ballot will still say this is a tax increase, when actually it's going to be a tax decrease. But in doing that, it will allow us to move more money onto the maintenance and operations side, so that we can pay our staff. It's a complicated, messy problem, but we've got to start paying our staff more. You look at teacher education programs around the state, and they are not seeing the enrollment in new students studying to become teachers, and we see teachers resigning at an alarming rate. And it's because we can't pay them at the rate that they need to be paid at, that they deserve to be paid at. There's also a lot of this war on educators and teachers that you see in the news, you see in the paper. Our teachers are phenomenal, our students are phenomenal, and we've got to get to a point where we can support our staff and support our teachers. People ask me about, tell me more about the book bans, tell me what's happening there. And recently PBS NewsHour did a segment on book banning, and they focused on Leander ISD. And they talked to one of the school board trustees, they talked to a parent, and then they talked to a banned book club of students. And somebody said, people were like, oh, did you see that segment? And all I could say was, I loved it. You saw our students, and they were like, if that wasn't the best display of critical thinking and advocacy right there on display for everyone. It's like, here they were going through every single book that had been removed, suggested to remove. They meet on campus, during their advisory period, they read the book and they sit there and talk. Why do you think the adults want to remove this book? Let's talk about why they want to remove this book. So I just am always amazed at how resilient our students are, and how it's just, our students are ready to be engaged, and they want the voice. They want people to think about them, and they advocate for their teachers. They advocate for their libraries. When folks ask school board trustees, what's your take on these books? What's your take on this book? I'm not a librarian. I don't have a PhD in library science. I shouldn't be the person determining curriculum. You shouldn't want your board of trustees determining your science curriculum, your math curriculum, your social studies. You want actual educated professionals who have gone to school and dedicated their careers to this. It's not the place of school board to do those things. And it's like, we have these wonderful educators that are doing this and providing these opportunities for our students. So I hope we can continue to focus on that and continue to, as we get into the next legislative session, talk about those unfunded mandates, because they do hurt. In theory, when we say reading academies, that sounds fabulous. Our teachers are going to have to take anywhere from 80 to 120 hours of additional work. Super. Is there any money to pay them for that? No, they should just want to do that. The tutoring, the summer tutoring. It's great offering that summer tutoring, but there's no money for it. Just make it happen. And so all of these items are unfunded mandates that school districts are figuring out how to do. And a lot of times teachers are figuring out how to make it happen because they want to, because they want to provide those opportunities. And I think it's important that we realize, I don't think there's any other profession that we tell people, you should just do it because you care about them. You should do it because you have a heart. You should just do it because, you're so motherly, or and it is a profession that's made up predominantly of women. And so I don't necessarily think it's a coincidence that it's also a profession that we often take advantage of. We're at this point in our society where we're going to really be impacted, and our students and future generations are going to be impacted if we don't start really taking care of our educators and making sure that we're taking care of them financially and taking care of their mental well-being as well, and the amount of work and responsibilities that we put on them.
All right, so at the courthouse, I never, ever thought I would have a job where I could work from home. But for over 2 years, we've had court from home. One of the things that happened was the state invested in Zoom accounts for all Texas judges who would do it. So across the whole state, we were Zooming away in court. That's bizarre. The law usually lags the furthest behind in technology. And over the pandemic, we were zoomed to the front line, which meant we had to figure out a lot. And we learned a lot, especially with populations that are indigent, that they primarily live in poverty or have a lot of financial hardships. We found that more people had smartphones than we thought and could log on to Zoom, so we got increased participation. For me specifically in my court, we found that parents were able to do all these things that were required of them in the CPS case and go to work when they didn't have to come down to the courthouse, find parking, spend all day, take that day off. So we saw a lot of really good benefits. We also did see the flip side, that some parents felt like they weren't getting their day in court. Something's different when you're just logging on and seeing the 2D judge rather than the 3D judge, and your lawyer's not right next to you. And there was a long period of time where a lot of visits with their children were virtual, which on the one hand, we realized, wow, you can see your child every day, but seeing your child and feeling your child is very different. So now that we're in this space, I don't know what to call it. I think a lot of people are saying a new normal. We're trying to figure out, what do our court systems look like coming through this other side of whatever it is we're coming through? What is a new normal for court, for family court, for CPS cases? We've seen that when we're not doing our best to check in on our children, especially when they're in facilities, that bad things can happen. So how do we do that better? We saw during the pandemic great things coming out of the county and the city for actual concrete supports, resources and services for our family that are starting to go away in some capacities, but they were extraordinarily helpful in parents getting their children back and being reunified. We also saw a big decrease in the number of cases that we were getting, but the intensity of the cases that we're getting were extraordinary now. So we have fewer cases, but they're more intense, more severe, more substantial issues that we're dealing with. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we serve these families better and differently? In our community, we unfortunately have had an extraordinary over-representation of Black children in foster care. At the same time, the other part that we don't talk about is an extraordinary under-representation of white children. So that means both, we have Black children in the system that probably don't need to be there, and we're missing white children who may be in unsafe situations that we have not accounted for and found ways to help and support them. We've got to do better there. So we are trying to figure out, how do we do this better? How do we settle into something different? Knowing all the tools that we have from technology, all the lessons that we've learned during the pandemic, I will tell you, child welfare judges look at what an emergency is differently. I've been calling it this pandemic lens of child safety and child well-being. It's different now when we're thinking about living in a pandemic and living with the issues that come up. How am I really going to determine whether a child needs to be removed from their family, or whether we can wrap that family with supports and services? And there's both that's needed in the community, and we have to be better at assessing which is which. So there's a lot of learning that we have to do. I will say my lawyers have gotten very comfortable being on Zoom, but we're starting to move back to the courthouse. In Texas, our very important determination of parental rights cases are able to be tried by a jury. And we have been doing virtual jury trials in Travis County. We were one of the first to do that. And the termination of parents' rights cases do occur virtually. We just started adding in-person jury trials again. So now we have more opportunities to work through cases because we had a huge backlog. We have laws that say children should be in foster care no longer than a year, maybe a one-time extension of 6 months. I have kids who have been in foster care for 2 years, going on more because of the pandemic. We got emergency orders from our Supreme Court that let us put a pause on some of the deadlines because we had to give parents their due process and a fair opportunity to be reunified with their kids, but that also left kids lingering. And getting families to their jury trials, there have been delays, just lots of things that have occurred. And so we're starting to get back up to speed and working through these older cases, managing the new cases that we have coming in. And with the pilot, we're doing a lot of that work better and really coming up with plans to better serve families. Some of the things that are coming up through the pilot, we have an advisory group that's helping us look at how we're actually making changes, because I think we're done with people in the system prescribing to families what they need. And really, let's hear from the people who are being impacted. So the parents who've gone through cases, the former foster youth, the grandparents and aunts and uncles who are adopting their grandchildren and nieces and nephews. We have a lot of that in Travis County. We have something like 67% of children in foster care are actually placed with relatives. And so we need to hear from them about the ways in which the system can be improved so that if we're going to reimagine it, they're the ones who are giving the feedback on how to do that. We're also looking at how we get information, especially to the court where I'm supposed to provide oversight when children are placed in facilities. Because we've had a lot of problems. We have a federal lawsuit about this. And what I started realizing is that foster parents and families, they have a home assessment that gets done. So 30 pages about what's going on in their home, who they are, their finances, all of that. I get to see that if there's any question about whether or not this is a good family. All of our kids, they have a thick packet. It's called a common application. Pages and pages about everything that they've gone through, and any time there's been a misstep, and all of the issues that they're going to need support with. That goes out to these facilities for them to determine whether or not they'll accept them. But when they want me to place a child in a facility, I get nothing, and literally get nothing. They tell me a name. Sometimes they know the location, sometimes they don't. Oftentimes I have to Google it and find a website. And I said, why are you giving me no information about a facility when this is such a critical place? They need to be able to take care of our children. We need to know who they are and what they're about. I don't understand why the state is okay and expecting me, judge, and the child's attorney, and the child's guardian, child's parent, to just all say, okay, let's send this child to this facility. The ones locally I know and I've gotten to work with, but whenever we start talking about places outside of Travis County, places outside of this region, and what's been happening a lot recently is outside of the state. They are sending our children to other states. And that opens up a whole other can of worms. So one of the things in our pilot that just started as of like last week, by court order, I have a 10-page questionnaire with questions that the state must answer if they want me to even consider a facility. Because I need to know who they are. I need to understand whether or not they're an affirming environment for some of my youth. I need to understand how they respect religious affiliations of the child. I need to know more about who's going to be taking care of our kids, how they train their staff, how they thoroughly vet them, whether they have any pending investigations, pending litigation. All of those things are in a lovely 10-page questionnaire. So I am awaiting to see the state's response after I have done this order in a few of our cases. And hopefully, though, they will realize the kind of information that not just me, but judges across the state really want, because I shared that order with other judges across the state. And we'll see if we're able to get better information in order to make those decisions about what's best for our children. So that's a little of what we're working on now.
Right. So now it's your turn. Any questions out there? Yes. Okay, hang on one second.
Yeah, is this working? Yes. Okay. So first I want to offer a compliment to Vicki. You're bringing this talent. It's Wow, that is so cool. And obviously, talent, thank you for, being here. Always, you navigate the big future. I'm a house volunteer for the last 20 years, over 50 kids, and I tell you, it's a real blessing to have the talent that this judge has. I've been from her before. My supervisor doesn't want to see other stuff, but it's a privilege. And talking about the school system and the finances that go with it, if I didn't be a part of the cost machine and go into the schools, because people said, wait a minute, like 60, a whole bunch of percent are not even teachers, they're about staff, right? But I tell you, if we didn't have that staff, with the counseling, the encouragement, and everything that goes with it, we wouldn't have a school to be proud of, you know? And I also have a question, because I see some synergy here, that basically, I like what Bridget said about the telecommunication savings. And I heard that all throughout here, the technology isn't what it used to be. Maybe we can find some places and to make things good. And I also, and of course, the budget problems that go with it. Obviously, there should be some positives on impacting the budget somehow. I'm not saying 100%, but we got to think differently. That's my argument. We got talent here, and I'm myself, and then my challenge, or called the arms or whatever, is that y'all work together to think about something that may be controversial, but I don't want to, go through a bomb here with school choice. Right? Now, I want to give a quick example, and I'll shut up here, is that I have a neighbor friend who came from Utah. They have a school choice machine that works. It's not binary, it's mixed. In other words, if you don't want to go to a particular class, call it math or whatever it is, you don't go. And this has been going on for apparently a whole bunch of years. And so the student and the parents, because you're talking about parent choice, they get to decide, and I've had at least a small collection of people I don't know whether my child attends this particular class or not. And so the teachers, according to this neighbor guy, I encourage the challenges to look into Utah or someplace like that, because we don't have to invent it. It's already been done in places where it's a mixed use, it's a spectrum. And also, right now, if you're homeschooled, you can't participate in anything athletics at the school. They pay all this money not to be able to access this. So, is it a challenge to try to navigate this? Absolutely. Maybe we have something that will fit us, rethink the future, and encourage you guys to do that with your school choice.
Well, thank you for your thoughts. I know in Austin, their families have the opportunity to send their kid to just about any school in the district. I know, in fact, that Westlake, I've heard of kids from Austin going into Westlake school, so I know that there are some opportunities when one school or even one district doesn't have a right fit for a kid. There's often a place for that child. So I think that we have choice. I think the problem is a lot of times families not knowing what's out there.
That's not what you talk about. You talk about your own school. And talk about your school work is on the partial basis. And this means goes. And also it says you go to a private school and not be involved in school. So it's a school choice across the spectrum. And you're right, that's really scary because it's about a public school, everything in the school is that's why we like it.
So, yeah, I mean, Texas, there's a lot of families that homeschool already. So I guess maybe what you're getting at is having dollars follow a child, and that's where it gets a little more difficult.
No, I don't have the coaches about that.
Yeah. So, okay, I will certainly do that. I will tell you that last session, there was a bill by James Frank, Representative James Frank, that would have allowed homeschool kids to play UIL sports. And, oh my goodness, you would think it was a fairly simple issue, but that was a very controversial, and it came down. It was a very close vote. He was going around talking to all the members, really saying, and you know, I have to respect him. He's got foster kids and he homeschooled, and so he knew a lot about the subject. I heard extremely good arguments on both sides, so that was a really tough bill to know how to vote on. But it looks like
That's actually what I see the challenge or opportunity. I don't have to do this. I encourage you guys to think that you're going to forget.
The only thing about that is the way our school funding, the whole state school funding mechanism would have to change because we get paid on attendance of students. So when those students then participate, there's no funding for them because they are not a student in that school district. And so if dollars followed them, then that would possibly be an option, right? But that is not in line with the current school funding. That's not to say that the current school funding scheme works, obviously. It now needs to be reimagined.
That's what Aurora's, she's not. She said, hey, this technology actually is working. It actually better. So I said, just get the roads out and listen. There you go. Easy for kids.
well, thank you. Well, I'll look into Utah, and it looks like we have another question.
Yes, I would like to thank you so much for this panel. And I would like to draw some attention to the jet fuel tank farms that, I don't know if everybody here is aware, but the asthma levels in Latino children in East Austin are higher than the national level. My nephew, David, has asthma, and he lives not 3 miles away from where these tanks are going to be installed. The Eastern Crescent is already underserved, very vulnerable. There's a high, lots of the people that live in the area are undocumented, so they're not going to protest. They're not going to go out and speak against these things, but I have nothing to lose. It's systemic racism to install jet fuel tanks in an area that's already underserved. In my opinion, anyway, my inflated opinion, it's not on what I know. This will bring down the air quality. The environment is going to be harmed by storing these things. If it was important enough to remove them from gentrified East Austin, then it's bad enough. It's going to be bad over there too. Anyway, I just hope someone will do something about this because it's harmful. And how many children have to die from asthma symptoms before this becomes alarming? And what color do they have to be? Because my little boy is brown and I worry for him and his health. Thank you so much.
So I know this came up before the city council. Do you want to say anything?
Laura, thank you for being here and for sharing your experiences and your truth. And clearly, you know, just on a basic level, there are a lot of disparities in health outcomes across our city and across colors. This is a vote that we took, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, to consider whether we should consider alternative locations for some fuel tanks that would be placed on the airport's property, or not. I voted not to move forward with considering alternatives. This was a tough vote. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of legacy of racism, and in taking that vote, I do not deny that. These tanks are going to be on the airport's property. There were as I do in every situation, I did my homework, I asked my questions, I took every lead that folks presented to me on this very seriously. And there was no evidence that any alternatives were out there. So in saying we're gonna look for other alternatives, all we were doing was postponing a tough decision and a tough call. And if we did miraculously find some other alternative because of the way the airport is growing and the way that the FAA regulates how you run an airport, we would very likely have to put something there that would be worse for the community, like a runway. And so given all of those things, given what we learned about the process from the EPA, et cetera, that was how I voted. None of that is to say that there wasn't missteps in the process, which is why I supported Councilmember Fuentes and co-sponsored a resolution earlier that encouraged further engagement and further conversation with the community. And I know that Councilmember Fuentes is working on some additional steps to make sure that our airport works better with our community, that our airlines see it as important to move forward. The other thing that I want to say is while the East Austin tank farms loom very large and rightfully so in our collective memory, there are some distinct differences in the technology and what we are looking at. Is anything foolproof and disaster proof? No, we've learned that with the pandemic, that a lot of our things are not necessarily perfect. But we do, we do have to make decisions based on the information that we have and understand whether those alternatives actually would lead to a better situation for that community or just recreate it in another community. And it was not an easy decision, but I stand by my vote and made a decision based on the information that I have, and I'm committed to working with Councilmember Fuentes. I've already shared some ideas with her about how the airport can be a better neighbor and how the airlines can be better neighbors as well.
Can you talk about what we've done to ensure that the air quality is not worse? That's my concern, because that's where our kids are breathing, right? I live in East Austin too. I live past 130, it's right that gigafactory. Anyway, that's another source of frustration, but my concern is our children and our own
So from what I understand from the fuel tank itself is not a huge contributor to the air quality problems in terms of what they're allowed to do under the EPA and whether they were there or 300 feet away in the other direction. It's still going to impact the air quality to the extent that it is. The broader question of what we can do to improve our air quality and make sure that there's not a disproportionate impact or that we're not, we need to make sure that we're taking care of the air quality across our city. Those are questions that we can discuss and that we can find ways to tackle. And I appreciate you raising them, and be happy to talk with you more about that. There will be, a lot of issues as the airport grows that impact air quality that will be much larger than this fuel farm, just by virtue of having more air travel. And so there will be plenty of opportunities to continue that conversation. But it is not just sort of the airport. I mean, there was 45,000 cars a day on 183 going between where that tank farm is and the community that lives nearby, which causes a whole lot more air pollution than anything that's coming out of the tank farm specifically. So those are questions that we need to be asking and working on, and it's a broader question for air quality in our community as a whole. Thank you for asking the questions.
15 minutes. Let's see if I got this. So I'll skip my introduction. But I'm curious what decisions that each of you had. What is the decision that each of you had to make recently that could have been a better decision, so a faster one or more aligned with the morals, I don't know, whatever you define better to be, that could have been better with more data, whatever that data is. So what is the decision that your office had to make recently that could have been better with more data? What is that data? I'm curious for all I can do.
Thank you. That's a great question, and this was a difficult issue and a difficult discussion in the community, and still is. We are required by state law, as are all 254 counties in Texas, to fund the county jail. No one's happy about this, no one likes to put money into jails, but we are required by law. It's a state mandate, and it's in the Constitution. We have a number of women in our jail. The number has fluctuated, but it has been steadily growing over time. They are currently scattered throughout the men's jail, because the jail was designed for men. We are not able to offer programming for them, because they each have to be individually escorted from their cells to a central location, and by the time they're all escorted, the time is used up. And there are no appropriate medical facilities for them. And so in a facilities comprehensive planning process that began before I got on the court in 2015, consultants recommended that we plan to build a facility for the women in the jail. And the community, there was a big outpouring, particularly from people who have been involved in the justice system. And those who spoke felt very strongly that we should not be spending money to build a quote nicer jail for the women who are there. We should be doing more to prevent them from being in the jail in the first place. And I philosophically agree with it, but I'm still stuck at the end of the day with the women who are there not being treated properly. So that continues to be a difficult decision and difficult choice. And the state doesn't give us the same ability to pay for and sell bonds for treatment and prevention like it does for detention in a jail facility. So that's another way. If there's any way to look at potential for state funding for preventing people from getting in jail in the first place, because it's so much, if you're just looking strictly at the finances, prevention is so much more effective, so much less expensive, and obviously so much more humane, much better for the people involved. But that's one that has been difficult and will probably continue to be difficult. And there's all kinds of data all around it, but there's also a very human issue involved as well. So data and humanity.
I think for me, as we're in the process of making budget decisions of the school district. And what I mentioned was proposed by our CFO at the last meeting, and we haven't voted on that yet. We're still discussing, and a lot of that decision is being based on what do you think is going to happen in the next legislative session? What do you think SBOE is going to do? What do you think TEA is going to do? And so if we had information, if we knew what school finance, if that's going to change in the next legislative session, if we knew if, when we talk about TEA and Representative Goodwin talked about hold harmless, which was this year, based on our attendance versus students in school. We didn't know how that was going to play out the whole school year. So having to make decisions on how you're going to finance your school for the upcoming year without knowing what the rules are going to be. If we knew the information, if we had the data. Other parts of it are, just demographic data. We have data about our growth of our schools, and we pay a lot of people to tell us how many people are going to move into the district, and we get all these different pieces of data. But they're not always accurate. So if we knew what the funding formula was gonna look like next year and the year after that, we could make better decisions for our school district moving into that academic year.
So, I'll just say as a judge, I really love data. So our pilot is data driven and we're collecting data throughout our whole pilot. However, I don't think that we are capturing all of the data that we need to capture. I know the state regularly has to send the legislature some demographic information, and that's really helpful. That's where I've gotten the statistics about Black children, and actually in Travis County right now are 6.4 times more likely to be removed than white children, which is down from 7.8 times just a couple of years ago. But that being said, there's still a lot of information we don't have. The top reporters to CPS are law enforcement, the schools, and the medical profession. What I don't know is from the sheriff's department or from APD, how many times did you all call CPS? And what's the race, ethnicity, and zip code breakdown there? From the schools, how many times did you all call CPS? And again, race, ethnicity, and zip code breakdowns from there, as well as with the medical field. I don't have that. I don't have how many times CPS called law enforcement on our kids, because a large majority of our kids who've been sleeping in offices are dually involved. They're also involved in the juvenile justice system. How many times was that initiated by the state, by CPS calling law enforcement? Don't have that data in the breakdown by race, ethnicity, zip code. And another piece of data that I don't have is how many of our foster youth identify in the LGBTQ+ community. I don't know. The state is not tracking that. How many of those children are the children who've been sleeping in offices? I don't know that number, but from what I've seen, it's an over-representation. Our children who've been sleeping in offices are of color and they identify in the LGBTQ+ community. And the reason that they're in those offices is because placements have denied them to be in their facilities, homes, whatever it is that you want to call it. Why is that? And so if we don't have that data, we can't do the analysis, and I can't make the decisions to figure out how to better invest to serve our children. And so there's a lot of that data that is along those lines that I could make better decisions, which is why, in our pilot, we're going to capture as much as we can to try and show what our data shows in Travis County. Texas is a big state. Texas is very different all around, and it's very important, especially for our legislature, I believe, to understand all the communities in Texas, not just Travis County. So I think that there's a lot of data that's missing around the children that we are serving and how and why we got involved with them.
Okay, so two things came to my mind when you asked that question. Not just for my office, but for the legislature in general. One would be gun safety and having better data about whether background checks would make us safer. Also, there's a lot of suicides that happen by gun. Just better data around are those guns being stored safely or not? And that might make a difference in the gun laws that we pass. And then medicinal marijuana. So we had a bill, my first session, where we expanded the medicinal use of marijuana. The problem is nobody can agree on what's safe or not because doctors aren't allowed to do trials using marijuana. And so we need a lot of studies, a lot of research, and a lot of data around that.
Thank you, that's a really interesting question. I would refer to our efforts to end homelessness and make it rare and non-recurring. For the last 2 years, we've not been able to do the point in time count in January. And so while we've made a lot of investments and a lot of changes in our policies over the last couple of years, our ability to judge the success and know what's working and what's not is less than it ought to be because we don't have the kind of data such as it was that we could have had in the past years to be able to compare what we're doing now to what we were doing back then. Because of COVID.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Does anyone have a final question?
I don't have a question, but I can't leave an opportunity to talk about school finance. So school finance is not technically in my bailiwick as a council member, but I've been really engaged in improving school funding at the state level. I think that increasing school funding and adjusting recapture would be the single most important thing we could do for affordability and equity in our community. We will have sent $761 million to the state to fund education of children outside of our city, while we're still struggling to serve the 52% that are disadvantaged in our own community, and that's just the ISD. And that's just this year, and in a few years, it'll be over $1 billion that we're sending, and that's more than we spend in our own school district. We can fund an entire other AISD school district. So this is a really, really important topic for our community, and we need people like you to get informed, to get engaged, but we need you to call people outside of Boston. As Vicki demonstrates, our delegation is great on this issue, but we have to change the hearts and minds around the rest of the state and create mechanisms and momentum so that legislators around the state know that we are underinvesting in our children. We are 42nd in per capita school funding in the nation. This is Texas. Texas does not like to be below average, but we are 42nd. We are way, way below. And that affects everyone, whether you are in a recapture district or not. And we really need people to get the word out. I see someone from our business community, one of our business leaders. We need our business community to say to the legislature and the governor, this is not okay. And it's not okay whether you are a recapture or not. We are underfunding our kids' educations. We are stealing money from tax dollars in our education and claiming them for the state. I just had a newsletter where I covered this, and if you're interested, email me, we can send it out to you, have some good resources in there. This is a really, really important topic, and I appreciate the work that Gloria and Vicki are doing on this, and encourage you all to be involved. Bridget and I serve on the joint ASD County City Committee, and we've been talking a lot about this issue of late. Thank you.
I just have to say, Alison has really done an enormous amount of work around this issue. What's the name of the profit nonprofit?
Yeah, I'm a co-founder of Just Fund It TX, which is advocating for increased school funding. It's parents and teachers around the state and students. And we really just have to get those voices to be heard. Yeah, you can go to justfundittx.org. Raise Your Hand Texas also has resources, and I think it's Recapture Texas.
She's right, it's the single biggest thing that we can do around affordability, because it's more than half in many cases of the property tax bite that comes out of each community. And they're literally stealing our children's future. But they're particularly doing it in Austin. We are hit the hardest of any community in the entire state.
All right, well, I think it's just about 8 o'clock. So thank you again for coming out tonight, and you can always reach out to any of us, I'm sure. Thank you.